Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
Well, the heatwave has also peaked with records falling across continental Europe today. There have been record high temperatures across Belgium, Netherlands and Germany. In Paris, the mercury hit 42.6 degrees Celsius, the highest ever recorded in the French capital. From there, our correspondent Lucy Williamson reports.
The city of light has become the city of heat. 42 degrees, just bearable if you're mostly underwater. The government has repeatedly warned people not to stay out in the sun, but with offices and schools closing early and most homes without air conditioning, not everyone's listening.
It's difficult to enjoy it. Here we are in this most amazing city in the world, and you know it's tough to want to go and do much.
It's very hot. The summer in Brazil is not like this. It's hot too, but here is too much.
This is a short, sharp spike in temperatures, but what a spike it is. The heat unremitting now for several days and nights, and in a city not built for this kind of weather. For many people, air-conditioned shops or public fountains are the only places they can find respite.
The hot weather is putting pressure on farmers, already facing a drought. Luc Smessard says the grass his cows should be eating has died in the field. He's using up his stock of winter feed to keep them alive.
Our fields have become as dry as doormats. We've never seen anything like it. It's like the south of France. We have longer periods without water. We're running at a 50% loss. We'll have to adapt and find solutions.
The heat wave broke temperature records across Europe yesterday and then broke them again today. Germany soared past 41 degrees as people flocked to swimming pools and fountains. In Belgium, temperatures topped 40, a historic record according to weather experts. And in the Netherlands, the hottest day for more than 70 years saw the Red Cross handing out emergency water supplies to the homeless. This is the second heat wave to hit Europe in a month. In Paris, where streets and monuments have weathered centuries of change, some wonder if the weather itself is changing. Lucy Williamson, BBC News, Paris.
Well, great rolls of thunder over us here at Kew Gardens. We've seen lightning as well. I'm not sure the current heat today is going to be with us tomorrow, but this weather has been driven by high pressure and the jet stream dragging tropical continental air from North Africa. Scientists point to the link between extreme weather events and climate change. Our science correspondent Victoria Gill has spent the day here in Kew looking at what we know about that connection.
Temperatures were among the highest in the UK today here at Kew Gardens, a scorching 37.7 degrees. So those who braved the sunshine came prepared. And climate scientists are now confident that heat waves, like the one the UK is currently sweltering through, are more likely and more extreme because of climate change.
The fact that we've seen these temperature rises, the baseline temperature has increased by about 1 degree globally since pre-industrial times, and it's that level that just means in normal conditions we'd see heatwave conditions and temperatures around kind of just above average, but you add that extra layer of heat on, that's when we start to break those records.
And globally over the last century the trend is clear. It has been heating up. The last 4 years were the warmest ever recorded. For the future, the temperature increase depends on global carbon emissions. Current targets that governments have signed up to limit those emissions will see a rise of about 3.3 degrees by 2100. Under the Paris Climate Agreement, that's the more ambitious deal signed up to by almost 200 countries in 2016, the aim is to keep that below 1.5 degrees.
Today of all days, we've come to the hottest glass house in Kew Gardens because this is where all the desert-adapted plants live. And even for these plants, they've opened all of the windows to try and get some ventilation in here because according to my thermometer, it is now more than 39 degrees in here. And these plants are adapted to the hottest, driest conditions on Earth.
It's those adaptations that scientists here are studying in order to work out how we might grow more drought-resistant plants in the future.
These plants are called succulent plants because they've evolved over millions of years to have specialised water storing tissue. The part in the middle is where the specialised water storing tissue is located, yeah, and you can see how much water there is in there.
While the collections here look exotic, they contain plants that could eventually become familiar food crops.
Days like today tell us that if we carry on doing exactly what we've done in the past, then that's not going to work. So we're going to have to adapt what we do and potentially adapt the crops we grow. And so we need to be exploring, we need to be researching, we need to understanding our options so that we can change as climate begins to bite.
With the gardens baking in the sun today, the preparation continues for a warmer, more uncertain climate in the future. Victoria Gill, BBC News, Kew Gardens.
Now, it was not quite the hottest day ever, but for many of us it certainly felt like it as top temperatures in Cambridge reached just over 38 degrees Celsius, a shade over 100 degrees Fahrenheit, while other countries across Europe have also been smashing their all-time heat records. From a near riot at an outdoor swimming pool to buckling railways, Britain's infrastructure just isn't set up for this kind of heat. We'll get more analysis from our weather presenter Liam Dutton in a moment, but first, here's Minnie Stevenson.
For this, the hottest July day in the UK's history, you'd definitely rather be here than here, waiting for trains that never came at London's Euston today and across the UK. Frustrated faces, fans, the fear that rail tracks would buckle in the extreme heat. Cue cancellations of major services by Network Rail, massive disruption, and the overarching message on the tannoys: don't travel.
Today we're seeing record temperatures. To gear the railway up for record temperatures would mean it would fail every day on the normal railway. So you have to make those engineering decisions, and that's what we have done. And therefore, we're keeping the railway safe and we're keeping it operational.
And this afternoon, this was the scene as a fire broke out trackside in North London, suspected to be heat-related. Trains stopped as passengers were evacuated. We spoke to the commuters who were on board.
The train going the other way basically caught the overhead line, or it fell down on top of it, and then carried on going. So all the lines got stopped. We were stuck on the train for probably about an hour and a half, trying to find out what to do. We evacuated through the driver's cab, onto the driver's cab of the other train, and then walked through the train off onto the platform.
For some emergency services, a rise in call-outs since the heat wave began. Take the London Ambulance Service. We're filming with paramedics today when they're called out to an emergency.
So we're going to a stabbing.
It's not fatal, but a man's been attacked while another has been arrested.
What's been going on here?
Okay, so basically at the moment it was an unprovoked attack. Someone's sort of like come at him whilst he's been sat down with a flick knife, sort of like profusely sweating, so obviously we need to make sure that he's okay. But most likely that's probably to do with the heat, so.
And while it may be tempting in the heat, police today repeated their calls for people not to swim in open waters after the bodies of two men were pulled from the River Thames yesterday.
The River Thames is a really dangerous place to swim. The tides are extremely fast. In fact, they're twice as fast as Olympic swimmers able to swim. So that makes them particularly dangerous. And there's many obstructions in the river, such as bridges, piers and barges, which people can get trapped under, or they create tidal eddies where people can get drawn down into the water, which unfortunately leads to drowning.
The advice from Public Health England today was stay out of the sun if possible. This was Britain's highest beach, Gaddings Dam in West Yorkshire, a swim with a view and an unexpected audience.
It's natural, it's lovely, especially the cows having a little paddle as well.
I think it's absolutely beautiful. It's like being in an island in Greece or somewhere.
Bit of a summer storm here in Liverpool all of a sudden.
After the heat comes the heavy rain. The Met Office have issued severe thunderstorm warnings in England and Scotland. With the risk of flooding, commuters have been warned there could be more disruption on the way, as the tempestuous weather which has consumed so many of our conversations continues.
Well, our weather presenter Liam Dutton joins us now from central London to explain more about this record-breaking heat. Liam, I'm no expert, but it's hot, isn't it?
It certainly is hot. I'm feeling the heat here right now with that sun blazing down. It's 7:20 in the evening and temperatures still across central and eastern parts of England are widely in the low to mid 30s Celsius. Remarkable for the UK to still be that hot at this time of the day. But the heat's expanded right across the UK. 30 degrees today recorded as far north as Scotland and as far west as Wales. But the heat, as we've mentioned already, has been focused across eastern parts of England. That new July temperature record of 38.1 Celsius, that's 100 Fahrenheit, recorded in Cambridge this afternoon. Not quite making the all-time temperature record. That still stands at 38.5, and that was set at Faversham in Kent back in 2003. So what's been causing this heat wave? We'll take a look at this. It explains all. We've got the jet stream dipping south just to the west of the UK, and it's drawing up this massive plume of really hot air across mainland Europe. And it's not just been the UK experiencing record-breaking heat. Today, Germany, also Belgium and the Netherlands broke their all-time temperature records, and some places are passing 40 Celsius for the first time.
The question many people will be asking is, how does this fit in to that whole issue of climate change?
Well, if you cast your mind back to just a month ago, there was another heat wave across Europe. That one didn't affect the UK, but again, the western half of mainland Europe had very intense heat. For example, France broke its all-time maximum temperature record, reaching 46, and Poland, Germany and the Czech Republic broke their June temperature records. Now, there's no doubt that the scientists will be sitting down, looking at great detail at these heat waves that have happened. They'll be looking at all the numbers and the figures and seeing how much of a role climate change has played. But even putting that to one side, one thing is for sure, the heat waves that we've experienced over the past month align with the expectations of climate change. They're more frequent and they're more intense. Back to you.
Liam, thank you very much. Well, joining me from Leeds is the president of the Society for Acute Medicine, Nick Scriven, and with me in the studio is Julia Barfield, a supporter of Extinction Rebellion and one of the architects who designed the London Eye. Thanks both for joining us. I mean, brawling at Lido, commuters told not to try to travel. Our ability to cope with this is pretty pathetic, isn't it? I mean, how long can we use the excuse that we're just not expecting it, we're not used to it?
Well, this is the climate emergency, you know, in its early stages, or you know, it's here, and you know, this is an extreme weather event, and there's going to be more. It's the new normal, and you know, I think we need to wake up to that, and particularly our government needs to wake up to that.
Nick Scriven, we're used to the NHS having to steel itself for now what seems to be an annual winter crisis, but summers like these periods are really throwing up challenges, aren't they?
Oh yes, the number of patients that come into hospital because of the heat can make it just like winter in the middle of summer.
And what are the issues, particularly for vulnerable people?
There's a whole host of issues, basically down to the heat. People become dehydrated, become faint, dizzy, they get prone to infections, strokes, heart attacks. There's a whole gamut of illness happens in extreme heat.
And the question is, of course, are you prepared for that? Are you able for that across the NHS?
Well, after a couple of years we've had of unrelenting pressure, summer's normally the time we get a slight respite, but with temperatures like this and activity like this, the NHS is fully stretched to capacity.
And the hospitals themselves throw up problems?
Oh yes, hospitals at the moment tend to be, I feel, built for the winter and the normal climates we get in the UK. They don't cope at all well with very high temperatures for a whole variety of reasons.
What can we do? Can we do anything in the short term to make us better able to function as a country during these extremes of weather?
Well, I mean, I think we need to design our buildings differently. You know, the regulation needs to be much more firm and to go to another level, really. You know, we need to start building buildings that are with very high insulation standard to kind of passive house standards. And, you know, the regulation needs to force people to do that, because I don't think people, you know, house builders, you know, whatever, are going to do that of their own volition. So I think it needs to come from the government.
There is a slight difference, isn't there, about building a sustainable environment, but building an environment that better functions. Is that possible?
Yes, well, it's all tied in, because I think if you build like a passive house, you build a house that can withstand.
What do you mean by a passive house?
Okay, a passive house is just a kind of, it's a building standard that is just very high insulation rates. it loses very little air, and it has heat recovery units. So it can actually reduce bills by about 90%. So it's actually, in terms of its energy use. So it's the kind of thing that we need to be looking at in the future. And obviously we need to retrofit existing homes and buildings.
So for the problems that Nick highlights about hospitals, which are essentially old buildings built to keep the heat in, what can be done in the short term to help him and his staff and therefore help the patients?
Well, I mean, in the short term, there's going to have to be, sort of some kind of cooling elements. And, there's the new technology related to that. The government's banned any new gas boilers. Well, they need to be replaced by things like heat pumps. And the great things about heat pumps is that they can cool as well as heat. It's like your refrigerator. So, that's the kind of thing that we need to be doing.
Nick Scriven, what is the sort of advice you give to people to withstand these next few days of really intense heat?
It's the simple things that people have already heard about, is to drink plenty of fluids, keep out of the sun if you can, wear loose light clothing, make certain you've got all medication in that you're going to need, make certain you look after your neighbours and your family to make certain they are all okay.
And just in the long term, if, as we heard from Liam, our weather presenter, that these extreme periods are getting more extreme and they are happening more regularly, is there anything that we can do long term to make us as individuals better able to withstand these sorts of periods of intense weather?
I think we have to look at the way that people live in countries that experience a lot more than us in the Mediterranean, see how they cope and adapt it for our own needs here.
Nick Scriven and Julia Barfield, thanks very much for joining us. Thank you.
So to the heat wave now, and it might have felt like the warmest day the UK has ever experienced, but it wasn't quite. A temperature of 38.1 degrees Celsius in Cambridge made it the warmest July day, just short of the UK record from 2003. Nice for many, but not for everyone. If tempers were a little frayed by the heat, they were frayed even more by the transport problems they caused.
It's often the case we all flock to hot countries for our holidays, but when the heat visits us, Britain comes to a standstill. The rail network suffered the most today. Trains were suddenly halted, forcing passengers to be evacuated as carriages got too hot. From Leeds to Manchester, Bedford and beyond, delays and cancellations caused havoc.
We're trying to get to Leicester, but we just don't know if we'll be able to get home or not.
We've only just been delayed now, but we can't get home, so we're stuck here.
To overhead line damage, there was a total drop on all departures at London Euston.
Services from London to Luton were cancelled tonight after a fire broke out caused by damage to an overhead power cable. Fears tracks could buckle in the heat also left commuters waiting, hot and bewildered.
Clearly today is very frustrating if you're travelling on the railway. I ask that people plan ahead, contact the train operating companies, take your water, medications, all those things that you might need to take them with you, and bear with us on this.
The emergency services too have been stretched. Ambulances called out to help the vulnerable.
It's an 89-year-old who's fallen.
These paramedics had to respond to a call about an elderly woman who had collapsed at home.
Right, my darling, shall we get you up as quick as possible? Yeah.
Doreen Green was found lying on the floor in roasting temperatures.
How have you been managing the last couple of the days in the heat?
Don't really worry me.
No, you've not been getting too hot?
A lot of people walk through this flat and say, cool it off. But I tell you what,
I think we're feeling it as well.
You're used to it.
And it has been hot everywhere, temperatures breaking records across the country.
This is the place that recorded the highest ever July temperature. It's Cambridge, and it got to 38.1 degrees Celsius. It has been sweltering here this afternoon, and the temperature has barely dropped this evening. It's July, it's summer, and of course we have always had heat waves, but why this one, and why so hot?
This time it's the high-altitude winds known as the jet stream that's causing the heat wave. Its normal path across the Atlantic has dipped far to the south, picking up super hot air from North Africa. But high pressure over Scandinavia is now blocking this heat from moving east and forcing it almost due north over Spain, France and onto the British Isles.
We've got really warm air coming up from Northern Africa, and that's bringing this really warm air up to us. But climate change is adding an extra punch, actually, because Northern Africa has warmed up by over 2 degrees Celsius over the last century. And in fact, there's been a greater level of warming in that part of the world than the global average as a whole.
We've been warned again and again that we'll have to get used to more regular heat waves. Questions then are now being asked why Britain isn't more prepared. Emily Morgan, News at 10 in Cambridge.
Well, in Paris too, there was some record-breaking weather. The city experienced temperatures of more than 42 degrees Celsius, 2 degrees higher than the last record set way back in 1947. Records were also broken in Germany, where temperatures rose above 40 degrees, as well as Belgium and the Netherlands.
Well, it's a bit of an understatement to say it's been really hot today, from Land's End to John O'Groats.
Well, brace yourselves, because the UK could have the hottest ever day today.
It's been the hottest July day on record here in the United Kingdom.
We all know that it's hot, but it is getting hotter.
It's been a very hot day, of course.
We've had a lot of hot weather, of course.
This is extreme heat.
The sweltering heat wave.
With the mercury reaching 37.7 degrees Celsius. It's also the hottest day of the year so far.
Well, it follows a similarly extreme heat wave in Europe in June. Weather experts have said today this all bears the hallmark of climate change. So will Boris Johnson's vision for Britain include bolder commitments on the environment? Our international editor, Gabriel Gatehouse, is here. Gabriel, first of all, what about the temperatures today? And is there an emphatic link to climate change?
Well, what the experts always say is that you can't prove a link to climate change to any individual specific event, because heat waves occur naturally, but that increased CO2 in the atmosphere increases the likelihood and severity of extreme weather events like this heat wave. And a Met Office study, I think it was last year, concluded that the UK was now 30 times more likely to experience heat waves than in the year 1750. Because of more CO2 in the atmosphere. So let's just have a look at the temperatures, because it wasn't just Britain. If we can look at the map, so that's 38.1 degrees centigrade in Cambridge in the UK, but then we had 42.6 in Paris. That was a record broken there, not in the south of France, but in Paris. The Netherlands, 40.7, that was a record broken, and then a little further east in Germany, 41.5. That was breaking a record that had already been broken again yesterday. So we're seeing this all over Europe, and this is after a heat wave that occurred there only last month.
So tell me, we have a new Prime Minister, and do we know what his stance is really on climate change?
Well, I mean, when he was Mayor of London, right, he projected a green image. He was all about cycling, it was the hybrid buses. But then there's the actions, his famous pledge to lie down in front of the bulldozers to stop the Heathrow third runway. He dodged that question again in Parliament today. In his acceptance speech for the Tory party leadership, he didn't mention the words environment or climate once, and that angered those Greenpeace protesters. And if you remember, they blocked his passage down the Mall to go and see the Queen. When he made his first speech outside number 10, he chastised the doomsters and gloomsters, as he put it, and he did mention the environment, but in a typically Boris Johnson kind of way, optimistic, entrepreneurial. He said Britain would lead the way in battery technology that could help cut CO2, and it was a theme that he returned to in the House of Commons earlier today.
We will be the home of electric vehicles, cars, even planes, powered by British-made battery technology, being developed right here, right now.
The trouble is, this is a bit of a kipper moment, because Britain isn't actually a global leader in battery technology. Yes, a Brit, John Goodenough, did invent the technology for lithium-ion batteries back in 1980, but he's since moved to the United States. Theresa May's government in 2017 announced £246 million investment for battery research, but that investment has been dwarfed not only by the US and China, but also by the likes of France and Germany. It's hyperbole or a kipper moment, depending. I mean, it's the details. It's the details.
It's the details.
But look, more broadly, in the House today, he did commit to Theresa May's commitment about reducing the UK to net zero emissions by 2050. His record on voting is mixed. He's voted against carbon capture and for taxes on green energy sources, but he has criticised Donald Trump for withdrawing from the Paris Climate Agreement. In 2015, up until 2015, he was still writing articles that were broadly climate change skeptical. And really interestingly, if you look at his donations for his leadership campaign, one donation of £25,000 comes from First Corporate Shipping Limited, whose director is Terence Mordaunt, who's also on the board of the Global Warming Policy Forum. That's Nigel Lawson's outfit, which is the most high-profile climate-denying think tank in the UK.
Well, maybe you'll be giving it back tomorrow morning. Thank you very much indeed, Gabriel. Now to discuss the science behind the heat wave and whether the government is really on track for net zero emissions by 2050, I'm joined by Michael Grubb, Professor of Energy and Climate Change at UCL. Good evening. Thanks very much for coming in. You know, we just heard just now, but you know, Boris can put plenty of energy into what he's actually saying, but has he got the record?
Well, I have to agree with your correspondent. I don't have a clue. I work in this space. I really do not know which of the various versions of Boris Johnson to believe. He, particularly given some of the background that would, you know, earlier background, I think we have to wait and see. But I think the key thing is he has fairly firmly nailed his colours to the mast of a legally binding commitment he backed only last month, which is to get to net zero. And that is a legally binding commitment, but you still say, well, how's it going to be delivered? Will he do what's required to deliver it? And how does it sit with a wider theme of his prime ministership?
And how does he deliver it? Does he have to do more than what's been done so far?
Oh, no question. He has to do more than what's been done before.
And yet that's not necessarily a priority for this incoming government.
You might say they have one or two other distractions. But the kinds of things at home need to be done. Clearly we should be moving to new build homes being net zero, with solar cells, with heat pumps that can also cool in summer as well as warm efficiently in winter. It should be banning internal combustion engines on the timescale the Climate Change Committee recommended.
But here there's a big dilemma, isn't there? Because what he wants to go for is economic growth. You know, we're going to be super productive and so forth.
Yeah.
But businesses have got a problem because so much of business is mired in old technologies. Even our car industry is not as good in terms of development of electric cars as in other countries of the European Union, I might say.
Well, I mean, there are always winners and losers in transitions. Today we heard him trying to talk up the promise of batteries, and it's also true. We're not really leading in that area. The UK has managed to catch up in the area of offshore wind. So there's some areas. But broadly, we've made progress in the electricity sector, ironically, partly because it was nested in European rules, which cemented in law the commitments to renewable energy, which then drove the technology and cost reductions. So you just don't know at the moment how serious it's going to be. And it's set in this very difficult context. We're connected to Europe by pipes and wires. We ain't going to build pipes and wires to the US or to China on the grounds that we can trade energy better. So there's real dilemmas. Our energy system depends on good European relations. So again, you get this sense that over the last month we see politics driving us in inconsistent directions. We're going to lead the world on low carbon. We're going to really great business opportunities. Low carbon technologies will spread, but actually we're drawing up the drawbridge and a no deal would seriously disrupt relations on climate and energy with the EU. So there's problems and we wait to see how they're resolved.
Grubb, thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you.